Hello, sixth graders. Thank you for coming to watch this video. We're going to be going over Fort Snelling and some pictures that I took when I was there a few years ago. Anytime during this video, if you do wish to look at a picture longer, just make sure you pause it. So this first one is just a map of what the United States looked like as it was expanding west, so it ties into that westward expansion. So it's country slowly getting bigger. And at the time Fort Snelling was built, it really wasn't even officially part of the United States in any way. But the United States was claiming that land, and that's why they wanted a fort there, was to stake their claim to that land. And as the picture loads here, there we go. This is look at a picture at Fort Snelling. Now, one thing that was unique about Fort Snelling, it was its shape. It was shaped like a diamond. So you can see here is the diamond shape. Basically take that square and slant it. And this is from one of the towers, the tower that's at the end. So that's what's unique about Fort Snelling is that diamond shape. It's right at the confluence or spot where two rivers come together. In this case, it's the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers coming together. That's why it has that unique diamond shape to it. Plus, it wanted to be diamond because you could see if anybody attacked you, you could see them coming from all different directions. Then the next picture is showing the gate into Fort Snelling. So this is one of the only areas you can get into the fort. So they'd have up here these little openings near the top would be for lookouts to look, see if anybody's coming, and then the doors. So one of the few wooden parts of the fort. The most of the fort was built by limestone, and they tried to make their walls 2 feet thick and about 10 feet high. And limestone was pretty sturdy stuff at the time. And where I was just at was called the Round Tower. And you can see here the Round Tower is the oldest standing structure in Minnesota, having been built around 1820. Historians believe the tower may have been intended to serve as a last-ditch defensive position, since some of the musket loopholes faced both inward and outward, or outside the fort's walls. The tower is the only real remaining part of the fort. The rest of it has been rebuilt. It was torn down, fallen down, whatever, and they had to rebuild it. The tower has been there the longest. Is one of the four buildings still there. So there's another view of that tower that I was just talking to you about. So one of the few parts of the fort that still remained from when it was built starting in 1820. This is just an angle of the fort looking down. You can see the limestone, various heights. They tried to keep around that height of 10 feet and 2 feet thick. And this is just looking down towards one of the rivers from the fort. So imagine at the time when they built the fort, those trees would have been cleared out because they don't want to leave anything there that the enemy could hide under. So those trees would have been cleared and they could have seen for miles if anybody was coming. And there's just another angle of the walls of the fort. You can see they have a little garden inside for food. And this is on the back side of the fort. Along here would have been the Minnesota River. Looking from the outside of the fort, just another angle to see the walls. Again, made out of limestone, about 2 feet thick, 10 feet high. Here is inside the tower. These musket firing holes that you can see there are pointing towards the inside of the fort. Because their thinking was if the fort ever was captured or people got into the fort, this way they could come in this tower and hide and fire towards the inside of the fort if they needed to. And this is what those firing holes look like. So you can see a lot wider on the inside and narrower as you get towards the wall. That way it's less of a target for enemies if they're shooting at you. So this is the magazine. The magazine is the part of the fort where they stored their ammunition. So this building stored the fort's ammunition. The magazine was capable of securing 20,000 pounds of explosives. Gunpowders, kegs. So kegs are big barrels where they store that gunpowder in. Musket, cartridges, gun flints, and artillery ammunition. Artillery is referring to cannons, so the cannonballs and things like that. The building's design was focused on safety. A wooden floor secured with wooden pegs instead of nails minimized the danger from sparks. A double roof kept the building cool, and a second entrance and interior blast wall would deflect an explosion upward and away from the fort. With walls 6 feet thick, this is the only one of Fort Snelling's reconstructed buildings set on the original foundations. So this is what that building looks like, and this is a reconstructed one. So this is not the actual one from the fort. So this is looking into it. So they really wanted to make it a safe place to store the ammunition. So now we're going to where the soldiers lived and they stayed. And we call that the barracks. So the barracks had the beds and places where the soldiers would spend the night. So basically it was their home while they were assigned to Fort Snelling. And we'll start first by going over where they look like. So here you can see this is the barracks where the soldiers, this would have been most likely the soldiers that were enlisted. So they weren't the officers. They weren't the ones in charge. So this is where their barracks would have been. And just looking down that same row of places where they would have lived, these people here wearing the white, they are reenactors. They were there that day pretending to be soldiers of the fort. And we'll start by going to the soldiers' squad room. So this is where the soldiers that were enlisted men, they were their job, they weren't officers. So they were there just to do the regular old work of the army. It says in the 1820s it was very common to share a bed with another person, whether a sibling at home, a stranger at a roadside inn, or another soldier in a military barrack. At Fort Snelling, soldiers lived in squad rooms, which contained 12 men each. With only enough space for 3 sets of bunks, these men slept 2 to each bed. This was not unusual for people in the early 19th century, which is the 1800s, so the men thought nothing of it. All soldiers not on guard duty slept at night. We are uncertain as to the exact size of these bunks, but they do measure a full 6 feet in length. People were not genetically shorter 170 years ago, the average height in the army being around 5'8". So these beds aren't beds that were there at the time, but they are made to look like they would have looked. So you can see that each bed would have the names of the people that would be sharing it because of space, they had to share. So it was 2 people to a bed. So they'd have their names, and then here what you can see, the 6 beds that the 12 men would share, so 2 to a bed. Just another angle here, you can see where the soldiers have their supplies and things they would need for whatever it is kind of work they have to do that day, in their uniforms, their hats, those kind of stuff. Here's another one of those reenactors I pointed out earlier. So this is what their day uniform would have looked like. They'd have dress uniforms if they had ceremonies or other reasons like that. But this is just their day-to-day clothes they'd wear. So they'd have to have a place where they could hang things. So this is what that is. So you can see there's a number, 1 through 12. So each person, each soldier would have a place to hang, whether it's their bags, jacket, maybe, whatever it may need to be. Whatever that means. And they also have a place to store their muskets. So you can see, again, these are numbered. 6 here, so they'd have 6 muskets would be in between these 2 beds, and then between the other 2 sets of bunk beds would be the other 6 muskets. And here's a fireplace that rooms would have, because as you know, Minnesota gets cold, so they have to have a place to warm up, and that's the fire, so each room would have one. Now we'll talk about the married quarters. So if you were a soldier and you happened to be married, you had a separate place where you could live. And you might have a room that looks like this. So you can see a place to do their cooking. Maybe most of the time they wanted to limit their cooking to the basement. That way they kept any rodents out. They didn't want little mice or other friends like that. So if you were a married officer, so in the military, officers they're the ones in charge. So they have a little more power. So if you were an officer that's married, you were allowed a bigger room. So you can see in the second paragraph there, it says married officers were allowed a parlor, a bedroom, a basement kitchen, and a personal garden. So their place where they lived were a little bit nicer. Again, because with rank comes privileges. So the higher rank you have, the better you're treated. So here is an example of what a married officer's quarters would have looked like. So you can see they have a bedroom in the back. Where I'm at taking this picture was the parlor. So like basically you think of it as a living room. And so if you were an officer that wasn't married, you would be sharing your room with another officer that was also not married. Sometimes slaves were brought there, so you might have your slaves with you too. But this is where unmarried officers would stay. So it looks very similar to where the married officers had, but they treated officers different, whether they were married or not married, in regards to where they lived. In the Army, they have different ranks. So you have privates, they're the bottom, then it goes up. Each group would have a sergeant. So they were really the ones that were making sure people were doing what they were supposed to do. And sergeants were responsible for the daily operations of their companies, everything from paperwork to drill, so making sure the men are practicing what they're supposed to leading different details of making sure that the soldiers are doing what they need to be and making sure the soldiers are looking good. So the sergeants would share a room together. So there's three different companies, so three sergeants from each room. So here they're sharing. This is what the sergeant quarters would look like. Very similar to what the enlisted men had. It would just be only sergeants living in these rooms. Then another difference is they would have a desk to do all their paperwork on, and these are those barrels that I was talking about earlier, the kegs. So this is looking into the middle of the fort, the parade grounds. And just like the outside of the fort, this area was designed like a diamond. So this is where the men would practice, what we call doing drills and things like that. So the sutler store, the men had to have a place where they could go buy things if they needed. So the sutler was a government-appointed merchant who supplied garrison. So this fort is technically called a garrison, with food, clothing, tool, and other items not provided by the military. The sutler store served as one of the garrison's few links to the outside world, as goods, news, and mail came through the store. Based on surviving records, historians have found that tobacco and alcohol were the most commonly purchased items in the store. The store also served as a social place where the enlisted men played cards, smoked and chewed tobacco, and visited in their few hours of free time. So anything they didn't get from the army, they could come to this store and buy. And you can see here it's a place where they also hung out. They could play chess, checkers, cards, and buy any kind of things up on the wall that you can see here. Or alcohol, tobacco were big ones, as I read there. Here coming up is just another angle of some things that they could buy. This is where the alcohol would have been stored. Say no to alcohol and drugs and tobacco. So stay away from that stuff. It's not good. And when they would go to make a purchase, this is where they'd go to buy it. And this is where they'd pay for things. And this is where I'm going to stop for the first half, just because I'm already gone about 13 minutes. I don't want to go any longer. So part two will be coming out soon. So have a great day. Bye.